So let's take a look at loops and ranges a little bit and how we can iterate over different values. One thing that I want to mention here quickly is that if you look at the variables here, you see that I've created this main function with a whole bunch of code. And if I come here and go back to loops and ranges, you can see that I also have this main, and there's no conflict. I can actually compile this and everything works okay. Why is that? That is because Kotlin allows you to have a main function per different file. So one package can actually have multiple main functions. However, you can't ever have two main functions in the same file. And this was a restriction. Initially, Kotlin would only allow a single main function per package, but that restriction was removed, and now you can have multiple main functions per package, but each have to be in their own separate file. So that's why you see that this works. So let's go ahead and create a for loop, something that we always do. So I have, for instance, an integer that goes, it's an a of type integer, and it's going to go from a range of 1 to 100, and I can do print line a. Now, notice I don't need to do toString. That's kind of implicit. If I actually write toString here, it's kind of not needed. And you see here that basically what I'm doing, I mean, if this is very straightforward. I just run this and it's going to print out 1 to 100. Here I have, again, an explicit reference to the type. Obviously, we don't need to do that, so I can actually remove this. And again, the compiler will infer that this is an integer, and it will just do for 1 to 100 and run the same way. Now, we can also do other things with loops. Now, here what we've got is an actual range. And the dot dot is for now, we're not going to worry about it, but it's basically an operator overloader for range 2, which is a built-in function. And we can use that when we declare a variable as well. So I can do val numbers equals 1 to 100, which is a really concise, simple way to just say, hey, I want a list of numbers from 1 to 100. And then much the same way as before, I can use that. I can say for a in numbers. And then again, reference the value and just print things out. If I want to do a reverse loop, I could do so also. I could do for, and then here I would do a in 100, but instead of the dot dot, I would do down to 1, and then again, print out the values. And if we duplicate this a fourth time, you can see that I can also use dot dot. So here we see the output twice, but now notice that this is print instead of print line, so that's why you get this weird thing over here. But notice, as I was saying, that down to dot dot works, so you can use either notation. Very concise way to define loops. If I want to get a little bit more complex with loops, a little more complex is an overstatement, but let's say, for example, I say for b equals 100 down to, let's say, 1, and I want to take it in steps of 5. I can also do that, so this will just decrement b in steps of 5. And so, you know, any kind of thing that you could possibly think of in a loop, you can basically do. And later when we'll cover collections, etc., we'll dive a little bit more into all of this operator overloading and the ranges, etc. So I can also, I mean, this is just an iteration over numbers, values. It's basically an index that's decreasing or increasing, but I can also do for loops over different values. For example, if I have a list of cities. So let's say I have or a list of capitals here, capitals, and then I could do list of. And again, don't worry about the list of, we'll see that later on as well. London, Paris, Rome, and Madrid. And then I could just do, for instance, for capital in capitals. Print line, and then capitals, capital. So that will go over a list of all of my capitals and print line each of them out. Notice here, and we'll see this in a little bit more detail when we look at deconstructing values, but the great thing about Kotlin is, again, we try to make it as expressive as possible. We wanted to make that your code is more about what your code should be doing, or as opposed to how it's doing it. So we allow these things like allowing you to name values in a for loop, give it a better name than just A or B or C. So I can say capital of, and I don't need to write string because it's not really required. It infers it as we saw before. So I could just do for capital in capitals and then print out each one. Obviously, there's other ways in languages to also define loops. For example, you can use a while loop. So I could do, for instance, while I is greater than 0, then decrement I, and I is not known. I can create that local variable. So I'll say while I equals 100, and notice that now it's giving me a red. Why is it giving me a red? Because I've declared it as immutable. So I have to do that as mutable. So that's a while loop that, again, just decrements the value. Much a similar way, if you're familiar with the do statement, you can do var x equals 10, for instance, and then while x is greater than 0, and again, do the condition at the end instead of at the beginning. And obviously, if you don't decrement that, that's going to not look too good for us. Now, in the case of the for loops and the whiles and the do's, one thing that Kotlin does provide us is with the ability to also break and continue from a loop. So what I could do is, let's create a loop, for instance, for I in 1 to 100. And I'll do, for example, for j in 1 to 102. And then I do, let's say, for instance, if j is modulus I equals 0, then I want you to break out of the loop. And what I could do is write break, and then reference the loop that I want to break out of. So I could say loop. Now what is loop? Loop is a label, and I don't have that label, but I can define it here. I can say loop, and now I can break out of this loop. So I'll say, I just want to break out and go to this label. So don't take that as a go-to, because go-to is not really a nice thing in languages, but it does allow me to break at a certain point and go out of a for loop. And of course, I also have the ability to continue. So I could just say continue, and here it wouldn't make much sense because I'm letting it continue. But if you have the ability to also continue and skip an iteration.